Welcome to the June 5th, 2017 meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission. I guess we'll start then with a roll call.
Commissioner Behringer.
Present.
Commissioner Niblin.
Here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Commissioner Clifford.
Present.
Commissioner Cooper is absent, and we have one vacancy on the commission.
Okay. Well, thank you. We have a quorum, however, and we'll go ahead and then proceed. We'll start with a salute to the flag, and I'll ask Commissioner Campbell to lead us. To the republic
For which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Campbell. I guess that'll take us then to administrative business. I want to start with the agenda. Before we move to approve it, I think I'm going to ask staff to maybe weigh in on this. I think we might want to consider rearranging the agenda slightly.
Yes, so this is regarding agenda item number 4, RIA 1-16, the rent increase application on Gateway. So there was an issue with tenant notification, and we did make every effort to get a notification of this application to tenants as soon as possible, and we did that actually hand delivering notifications on the 1st. And however, there's still some tenants that were concerned that they just didn't have enough time to get their thoughts and opinions together. And so we are recommending that this item be continued to July 19th in order to renotice and make sure that everyone has enough time to participate in this item.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Commissioner Clifford wanted to speak to this, so I'll go ahead and ask him to. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The point of making that speech at this point was to recommend that the commission move it up in the order of the agenda so that continuation can be done and folks who may be here for the item can go ahead and go home and enjoy their evening.
Okay, that sounds good. So the proposal then would be to move it ahead of item 1, the continued public hearing item, so that would be the first thing we'd consider. Is there anything else you want to say at this point, Commissioner?
That was exactly what I was going to move to do, so if that's okay with everybody.
Fantastic. Well, subject then to that amendment, which again would be to move what's marked right now as item 4 to item 1 on the agenda, can I get a motion to approve the order of agenda? Commissioner Gordon.
Yes. Well, so I'll move to approve the order of agenda as amended.
Commissioner Behringer?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Okay, well, that's a unanimous approval of the order of the agenda. Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any minutes we need to consider today, so we'll go ahead and skip over that. Is there a need for designation of liaison to the City Council?
None needed.
Thank you. Okay, so that takes us into oral communications, and this is the portion of the agenda that's available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. I don't presently have any cards for oral communications. Is there anybody who wants to speak to an oral communications item? Okay, well, I don't see anyone, so we're going to go ahead then and move along. So there are no consent items, is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. So that then will take us to item, the first item on our agenda, what was originally marked as item 4, and this is RIA 116, rent increase application RIA 116, filed by the applicant law offices of Mark Hayslip pursuant to Pacifica Municipal Code Section 9-4.2455E to increase the rent by 25% or to market rate, whichever is lower, upon the expiration of each tenant's term at 435 Gateway Drive, etc. Is there a staff report, or I guess at this point we would be considering a continuation of this item. Is there anything else that staff wants to say with respect to any of this?
No, not at this time. So it would be continued to July 19th.
July 19th. Did the applicant...
June 19th.
June 19th,
Sorry.
Thank you. Did the applicant have anything to say about the request to continue?
They were disappointed, but nothing other than that.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think unless there's further to be said about it, I think a motion would be in order to continue this matter. Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, I'll move to continue item RIA-1-16 to our next meeting on June
19th.
19th.
Thank you. Commissioner Clifford?
I actually think we're required to open the public hearing because people have come to speak on the item. They have the right to do that.
I'm not entirely sure we're required to open a public hearing if we continue
You're
the
not
item.
if you continue it.
Okay.
I'll move to continue.
So will that be a second then? Thank you. Well, I've got a motion, a second. Can we go ahead and take a vote on it then? Okay, well, that matter's been unanimously approved, 5 votes to none. So we'll go ahead then and continue that item to June 19th. Thank you. And anybody who came, thank you for coming, and sorry about the short notice on the continuance. The next item then will be TA 10617. This is text amendment TA 10617 and rezoning RZ 19717, initiated by the City of Pacifica to enact new zoning regulations, amend existing zoning regulations, and establish new overlay zoning districts in the zoning map related to the operation and location of marijuana businesses and related activities. This text amendment would be is to be discussed would affect properties citywide. The rezoning to be considered would affect specified properties. The recommended CEQA status is exempt, CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, and the recommended action from staff is to adopt the attached resolution initiating the amendments and recommending approval to the City Council. Good. Is there a staff report as to this item?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Honorable Commissioners. I'm Associate Planner Christian Murdoch. This evening's public hearing is a continuation of the hearing held on May 15th. During that hearing, I provided an overview of the draft ordinance regulating marijuana activities in Pacifica, and you received public comment. After deliberating, the Planning Commission provided guidance to staff to revise the draft ordinance to address certain particular concerns. Staff has prepared an updated draft ordinance which it believes addresses these concerns. The revisions centered around the following: reducing the buffer around daycare centers to 200 feet in order to increase areas eligible for marijuana operations, including marijuana retailers, and identifying additional areas where the proposed marijuana operations overlay zoning district could be located, which would regulate the potential locations of marijuana retailers. Staff has proposed 2 new overlay zoning districts, one at the Fairmont Shopping Center in the Fairmont neighborhood, and one at the Park Mall Shopping Center in the Park Pacifica neighborhood. Staff has also added additional properties to the Sharp Park Overlay District. The Commission discussed a third key topic at the hearing, whether to permit edible marijuana products. After careful consideration, staff left the ordinance unchanged with respect to these items. In staff's assessment, if edible marijuana products were to be allowable for sale in medical marijuana dispensaries, as there was widespread support to allow, then staff had concerns about the enforceability of the partial prohibition, considering that the draft ordinance would allow combined medical and non-medical retailers. From a practical standpoint, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for staff to enforce the prohibition in any combined retailer. Aside from the specific changes noted, the draft ordinance remains largely the same as the version previously before the Commission, except for some various cleanup amendments. It would still permit outdoor cultivation for personal use in residential districts subject to certain performance standards, and would allow 3 types of marijuana commercial activities subject to approval of a marijuana use permit. These include marijuana retailers, both medical and non-medical, marijuana testing facilities, and marijuana manufacturers combining extracted compounds into other products without the use of volatile solvents. Each of the 3 commercial marijuana operations would require a companion marijuana public safety license issued by the police chief and addressed by a separate ordinance. Lastly, staff received 1 public comment on this item, which it has provided to the Commission. That concludes my presentation, and I look forward to your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or clarifications from members of the Commission at this point? Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So, Christian, where are we in terms of the max number of licenses that would be issued? Are we at where were we at? 6 or 5 or what?
So of the 3
I'm
commercial...
sorry, I'm talking about retail.
So of the retailer establishments, which include medical dispensaries and non-medical retailers, we've not proposed to change the overall limit from 6. So it stands at 6 currently in the draft ordinance. However, there are potential locations sufficient for 10 retailers, 2 per proposed overlay district. So we responded to the Commission's direction to increase flexibility, but not to increase the overall number. That wasn't the direction that we received.
Right, yeah, and that's not where I was going with that either. I do have some thoughts about that, but I don't think it's the right time to do it in the context of questions for staff.
Thank you. I just want to note for the record, Commissioner Cooper's joined us at 7:08, so.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Any other questions or sort of points of clarification right now? Okay, well, absent any of that, I'm going to go ahead then and open us up to the public hearing component of this item. And I have one speaker card right now. If there's anybody else who's interested in speaking to this item, we'd like you to go ahead and fill out a card if you would. They're in the back. And we'll go ahead and take them in the order that we get them. Cheryl King I've got a card for her, so we'll go ahead and ask her to come forward, followed by Tiger just Big Stike. Did the best I could.
Good evening. As I've explained before, I was a licensed daycare provider in Pacifica for 14 years, and now I've been doing clinical outreach with the mentally ill, many of whom are heavy cannabis users throughout San Mateo County. I just want to point out that in 4 big cities, Philadelphia, Boston, Seattle, and Long Beach, if you consider that big, they had so much trouble having enough places for the dispensaries. They all either completely dropped the daycare provision or they limited the buffer zone to 100 feet. All right. Now, right now, I can go and buy cannabis at any pet food store. I also do pet rescue. And cannabis have got cannabis in them. They're a luxury dog food, $15 for a little jar and $30 for a big jar, and that's to help dogs relax. So let it be known that anybody can buy cannabis at a pet food store. And when I was in middle school, my girlfriend and I used to lure boys over to spend the afternoon with us by serving them milk-bone dog biscuits. We thought those were just dandy, so who knows where cannabis can go. In researching everything about daycare and cannabis, I noticed where the cities are really having a lot of trouble now is with the family home daycare facilities. Because who can control which daycare providers are growing pot or smoking pot or using pot? They even wonder, will these people be allowed to carry their cards or their cannabis when they go on outings with the kids? This is really a lot easier access for children than the forts that these local dispensaries are putting up to keep children from getting to the cannabis. Like I explained before, the city police came for a friendly visit at Surefire, and the staff said, no, you can't come in, you don't have cards. As a former licensed daycare provider, I can tell you that being responsible was very important to me. I didn't want to be liable for anything that happened to children. So there's no way as a daycare provider, a licensed one, that I would allow a kid to go into a dispensary. So I just hope you keep these things in mind when you're thinking about making medical marijuana available to those people who need it most. And they need it safe, even the people that use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Gargis Big Stike will be followed by Derek St. Pierre.
Good evening. I am Tiger Jazz, Twirls Big Stick of Pacifica. Thank you for hearing me. Just a couple brief notes. I'm in general in favor of everything, with the very, very minor exception of I have a concern of like inedible getting into the hands of a child. And while medicinally speaking, I think that edibles are an obvious good idea for folks who have like COPD and can't smoke. Whereas for a recreational retailer, if it is possible to limit selling edibles, I think that would be beneficial. And I did read here where it says that staff favors the approach of not limiting it because it believes the city would be unable to effectively enforce a partial prohibition. And ultimately, I think that it behooves people to regulate themselves and grow up and take responsibility for themselves and their own children. And that being said, if it would be not too extraordinarily difficult to limit specifically recreational retailers from selling edibles, or especially candy-like edibles, I think that would be wise. So that's where I'm at with that. Pardon me, I haven't slept much. And then I see that on-site consumption right now is prohibited under this, and makes sense to me where everyone's coming from and that this shouldn't be a rush job. I just wanted to suggest in a year or two or three, whenever it comes up next, when we revisit the idea of on-site consumption, what occurred to me is it would be a very interesting business model if whomever might be allowed to have an on-site consumption location would also provide some sort of a shuttle service to complement their business. I think that would be an interesting business model, and I just wanted to suggest that to whomever it would be appropriate to, the airwaves, if not the commission, when it is later revisited, so that maybe there's a way to do that responsibly, because I think that that's a venue that at some point might prove practically useful in healthy ways, though right now I'm very, very tired and I'm a little bit spur of the moment. So thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, Mr. Big Stick. Derek St. Pierre, followed by Tony.
Good evening. Again, my name is Derek St. Pierre, and thank you for taking so much time in the Planning Department and putting this together. I think it's a very thorough, well-researched packet of material. However, I think that a lot of the concerns that were raised at the last hearing and that were also commented on in the report weren't necessarily addressed by just the simple change of the buffer zone from 600 feet to 200 feet in reference to daycare centers. Part of one of the display maps in the back kind of shows the 600-foot buffer zone. I know it also doesn't include the 200 on the daycare. This seems to be from the last iteration of this, just a straight 600-foot buffer zones. But in reality, what's happening, if you look at the city of Pacifica, there's just not that much commercially available property to actually rent potentially to a medical cannabis dispensary. The areas that are open in Fairmont that you just opened up with the new zoning area, those are not going to be rentable to a marijuana business. In fact, we've spoken to the leasing agents at those locations. Those types of locations are not generally going to be available, so opening up the Fairmont and allowing two potential areas in there, yes, I like the idea, but in terms of having a landlord that's going to physically rent to a location, it just currently is not the situation right now. My two suggestions to augment the current modifications that you've already made are fairly straightforward. I think a reduction of a buffer zone to 50 to 100 feet is much more appropriate. I think if we all stand back and look at it realistically, I think the primary concern with a daycare center is having a dispensary located immediately adjacent to it. I think once you start putting some type of distance, 50 feet, you then address that concern. The only other comment I would make is I think it would actually be appropriate to open up the C1 district to potential medical cannabis dispensary locations. Right now it's limited to the C2 district. I think C1 would actually substantially increase the number of potential available sites. It doesn't mean that they're going to be actual sites, because you're still dealing with landlords that are not quite friendly to the idea of renting to a dispensary. And that's my two suggestions, is to expand it to include C1, and that an appropriate buffer distance would be 50 to 100 feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. St. Pierre. Tony will be next, followed by Karina Cardenas. And Tony, it's certainly not required to address the commission, but if we had your last name, it might make for a more clear record if you cared to share that.
Okay, I'll just continue to go by Tony for now. Okay?
That's fine.
Great, thank you. In looking at your latest draft, still had some more questions, but one of the things that keeps popping up at me, and I see here, especially now that the map now includes Park Pacifica Mall, is it's, as you know, quite close to Terra Nova High School. And it's outside of the buffer zone, but it still is quite close. And the reason why I bring that up is I've yet to hear at the meetings I've attended from the school district. Not one comment from the school district. And if there's anything that I think the common denominator we all hear, whether you're pro or con on this, is our concern for our youth here. This is for adults only. And so I think we all have that concern. And the reason why I say that as well is when I look at this article from the Denver Post and the impact to the high schools in Denver when marijuana was made legal in Colorado was enormous. As a matter of fact, it turned into be the #1 concern in schools rather than an active shooter or anything else. The teachers, they had to actually put a conference together led by the chief of police to help teachers identify edibles, the packaging of edibles, first aid, what do you do if you do see it, especially, according to them, this was a huge shift in the culture. Kids see their parents smoking it, see it marketed everywhere, and they think it's normal and okay for them to do as well. So you're talking about this big cultural change, and I think a lot of education needs to go along with this as well. And that more data needs to be gathered on the impact to our youth. What's going on in these schools? The schools were beside themselves. They had the understanding that funding and everything else was going to be working out well for them, and they had some major concerns that the funding was taking place, but the price to be paid was being paid by the children attending the schools. And when you open up Park Pacifica and the mall there, that's very close to a high school. So I'd like to hear from the school district and some outreach done to that. I'd like to hear some outreach done to the local businesses that are also going to be neighbors to these new businesses coming to town. And perhaps, since we see this expansion due to the mapping, perhaps a little bit of this should be taken on the road. Not everybody can make it down here on a certain day and once a month. Perhaps, and I've seen the chief of police do this when there's a criminal issue, they'll go down to the Crespi Community Center, 300, 400, 500 people will attend. You're going to be impacting this town citywide. I believe those neighborhoods that are going to be directly impacted should be heard. And especially in these days of lack of transparency, I think it would be very, very helpful to at least hear from them. There's going to be a cultural change, and I think we should be prepared for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Ms. Cardenas, followed by Rick Ziplane.
Hello, everybody. It's pretty overwhelming to talk to you guys. I have a lot to say.
Could you maybe pull the mic a little closer to you? Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'm currently operating at 35 West Manor, which is right there where the arrow is outside of the blue zone on West Manor. I am co-founder of Rockaway's largest, most popular dispensary, and after, parting ways, I've become an independent entrepreneur. I have the knowledge and I have the experience to be part of the change. The community has embraced me. I am already outside of the buffer zones, and even walking distance, it's over 1,000 feet where I'm located. It has to be like a super child if they're going to jump that barrier of the highway, which should be, the kids should be protected against that anyway. I would be adding to the community instead of taking from it. The neighbors are really excited about it. I've seen Rockaway's community grow when I became part of it, and I'm not taking all the credit, but I do pride myself on being part of the change in the community, especially Pacifica, which is so open and so cultured. So again, I don't really want to be overlooked where I'm located currently. I do have a lot to offer, and I want to be part of the community. I live in Pacifica, and I come from a faraway place that's not really where I want to belong. I know that you guys are concerned with the edibles. I have so much experience and knowledge. I can put together a blueprint of what edibles are, what dosages. I work very closely with manufacturers that do white label for a lot of the industry in general. I'm very, involved in the industry, and it would be something that would kind of soothe your concerns and the community's concerns. I carry a lot of the products that are really dosed out and tested to benefit my community that I so much love, you know? I don't want to hurt anybody. When I first moved out here, one of the first newspaper articles that I read in the Tribune was that a young girl of the 20s, early 20s, overdosed on pharmaceuticals, and it broke my heart because I come from a background where my parents abused substances, you know, and it just sucks because kids have so much to offer. And like I said, I want to add to the community by offering drug classes and working closely with police department. So I don't want to be overlooked. I do have a lot to offer the community, and, you know, I really do have emails to prove that I've talked to the city council. I brought this to the table, so again, I don't want to be overlooked, and I have a great business plan, and I work closely with lawyers, and here I am. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cardenas. Rick Zeppelin, followed by Richard Kokovar.
Thank you. Excuse me. I most certainly endorse medical marijuana as well as the right of marijuana for recreational use. However, I live right around the corner from Park Hill Mall, and I feel that this would be the wrong location for, quote, marijuana businesses and related.
Sir, could I ask you to get a little closer to the microphone?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start over? Okay. Hello, thank you. I most certainly endorse medical marijuana as well as the right of marijuana for recreational use. However, I live around the corner from the Park Hill Mall, and I feel that this would be the wrong location for the marijuana businesses and related activities initiative. After reading the Planning Commission agenda for 6517 concerning the marijuana businesses and related activities initiative for the proposed Park Mall location, I'm very confused and concerned about it, so if I don't get all my information exactly correct, please forgive me. First, these stores may create a lot, too much, unwanted traffic, congestion, and activity to this basically quiet area. With this area being very residential, apartment houses, private homes, etc., on the adjoining streets, Terra Nova and Odsted, and even a little further down on Toledo and Lindemore, stores such as these could be tempting to people, especially younger people, potentially leading to crime and vandalism. And as you've read, there was in the Tribune recently, there have been too many break-ins in Pacifica recently and already, and of course other illegal activities. Even though this would start out as a medical marijuana facility, it's logical to me to assume that this facility could, at some point, sell marijuana for recreational use, and even have a situation where one could actually smoke or eat marijuana on the premises and leave the store high or stoned, which could at least create potential worse problems like accidents. Where would the marijuana come from that would be sold here? Talking about personal cultivation and otherwise, again, this could lead to crime or vandalism, stealing or poaching for this cash crop, so to speak. I speak with some experience about this and about the various scenarios in which I spoke. When I was much younger, I, like many people at the time, smoked grass and acted a little crazy sometimes because of it. I'm not saying that the worst will definitely happen, but for me and perhaps many other people, there just seem to be too many red flags and things that could go wrong, even with the best of intentions, and I would hate to see this happen for everyone's sake. This Park Mall and the surrounding areas are pretty quiet, peaceful, and safe. And as I've said, in my opinion, and to my way of thinking, there are just too many possible threats to our community if this marijuana business and related activities were to be placed in the Park Mall area. So for these reasons and more, I ask you please to reject this particular location for these activities. It's not that I'm necessarily objecting to the what, I'm objecting to the where. This is a very residential area.
Thank
There are a
you,
lot of
Mr.
kids. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Zeppelin.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much for the opportunity given me to talk about
Yes,
this.
thank you. Mr. Kokovar, followed by Holly Smalley.
Good evening, Commission. Richard Kochevar, and the previous speaker took a lot of the things I was going to talk about, but basically, the back of the valley is a cul-de-sac, and originally Safeway was in Park Mall. It was 2 gas stations, 2 more or less provide services for the people in the area. I feel that being a residential area, next door to the library, next door or up the street is the grammar school, along with Terra Nova High School. I believe unless the actual area would supply or do well for the business there, I believe pulling people 2 miles back from the Coast Highway, for instance, Linamar Center, where Kimco does a nice job of renting out their places, I just believe that I feel Park Pacifica, Park Mall is an inappropriate place for this business, other than gaining the city more tax revenue for another business. There's one fire engine in the area that does mostly medical calls from Valleymar south, and they rely on Daly City and the North Fire Engine to come down to assist if there's another issue, and units coming over the hill from Devil's Slide. So I'm not saying medical issues would increase, but there is that possibility. My feeling is I just think the Park Mall, too isolated, is not the appropriate place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kochevar. Holly Smalley, followed by Ben Patty.
Good evening. Thank you again for taking the time to hear our public comments about the issue. I again looked on Craigslist and looked on City Loop and looked on all the other real estate sites where you can see, hey, what's available for rent? And there's nothing still. Eureka Square, which is out for Kimco. There's a Safeway, like the Lindemar stuff, that's out for Kimco. The Park Mall place has a tutor center there. Frank Vella is the real estate agent. We talked to him several times. He said no. There's no places to rent. And I just think that that should be noted. I looked up, information on like buffer zones and what other cities have done, and the lottery systems. And when a lot of different cities, what happened is they offered a lottery to, let's say, 20 people. And then as 18 months passed, still only like 1 or 2 dispensaries open because they weren't, even though you had approval from the city and you were vetted, you still couldn't rent anywhere. And so I look at today and I think, okay, we have some dispensaries in town. And I have some interest. My fiance has a place, and it's one of the dispensaries, but San Diego allowed for people who are currently operating as dispensaries some period of time to meet the standards and to continue to operate. Even the state licensing, the new draft for their regulations, allows the same. If you're operating right now and you're in good standing, you can continue. And with a grace period to meet the standards, meet the regulations. It's a complicated issue, and I know you guys are working really hard on it. But I think in a small city, sometimes looking at all those buffer zones and then looking at the lottery and looking at, again, I know also this is a push because you want to get the excise tax voted on and all that goodness. But for a lot of the dispensaries, again, this wasn't trying to be defiant. This is in the spirit of being an entrepreneur. The spirit of this passed by the state, looking at the state regulations, 600 feet from a school, a K-12 school, not infant daycare centers. I can't find that anywhere. And that's what we did. And we thought, great, we're there, we met everything. Right when the standards come out from the city, we'll meet all of those, we'll do a great job, we'll follow every rule, every regulation. And a big push for a lot of the dispensaries now is if you weren't already operating with a seller's permit through the State Board of Equalization by January 2016, you couldn't be considered one of the priorities for accessing your state license. We all want to be a priority. We all want to be looked at first and to be given that shot. But it says a lot of small businesses who I think are doing a good job, who want to do a better job, whatever you say that looks like. And I think that in a small city like this, sometimes you have to really look at your city and realize there's no places to rent. And if you take the 5 or 4 or 6 dispensaries and you kick everyone out because they did their best in the spirit of being a new, brand new, excited business person, and you say, goodbye, you guys are all doing great, sorry about it. We didn't have any regulations to ban you, but you did it anyways, and so you got to go. And now we're going to open up the lottery. I just don't know where the other 6 will go. We want to do our best.
Thank you, Ms. Smalley. Ben Patty.
Good evening, everyone. I had recently moved to this area about 2 years ago from Florida, and it's a beautiful area with great people, but unfortunately I noticed that instead of a marijuana problem, there's actually a lot of alcoholism around here and opioid addiction, I've realized. and I'm not any part of that, but that's what I've seen came to mind when I moved here. And like I said, it's a beautiful area with great people, but that's also one of the heavy things that I noticed was happening in this specific area generally. And in regards also to daycare centers or high schools and things like that, they should be monitored by the teachers and be in school, and also there's sheriffs there, and they shouldn't be skipping and things like that. And there's a highway divide, and they need to show their card, and they need to get through certain things, and they need to go through paperwork and stuff, so they're not going to get in there. And unfortunately, also in my life, I've had people in my life die from alcohol poisoning or car crashes or things like that, but in general and in history, I don't think I've met anyone that's been killed by cannabis unless they've been crushed by a ton of it. But that's about it. And in regards to edibles, it's going to be pretty hard to get your hands on them because of the regulations, but I know plenty of youth that will get alcohol from people that are 21 or just go into the Safeway and steal it or wherever they want to and just run off with it or take it. And yeah, but I've seen proof of deaths from alcohol and just a lot of bad things from it, but you can get that anywhere you please, and it's not really behind a shelf or anything. Like I said, kids, they don't need an ID. If they want it that badly, they're going to steal it. So it's tenfold compared to the cannabis industry. Same thing with opiates, too, just because a prescription, I know plenty of people that can get their Xanax or their Oxycontin, and that's made by the government. It's made by us. It's American, but like I said, I've known plenty of people that have died from that, but I'd never met a death from marijuana. I've met people that have not had a good time on an edible and thought they were dying at the most, but they didn't die. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Patty. Well, that's all the speaker cards I have. Was there anybody else who wanted to speak to this matter? Not seeing anybody else, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. I'm going to go ahead and bring then the matter back to the commission. So I'm going to just open it up to my fellow commissioners then. Commissioner Campbell.
Well, I think the medical marijuana side of this equation, I'm seeing a lot of consensus that we're not really opposed to that. So I think it really is coming down to a few discrete issues of location and then the edibles issue. And for me, again, I think I would have stuck with the 1,000-foot buffer. I think that there's a lot of towns and municipalities that have gone with the 1,000-foot buffer, including some large cities in the United States. And I think it would also clean up some of the areas that are of most concern if we stuck with that 1,000-foot buffer. I think that we have to remember the people have spoken in approving recreational marijuana, but the part of that law was to allow local municipalities to reasonably regulate the location of marijuana facilities or not even allow them at all. I mean, we were given that freedom. So I think it's more than reasonable to allow for the medical side to come in and then have some reasonable regulations on the recreational, and that's location. I think it's crazy to put some of these facilities closer to the high schools and grade schools here in town than necessary. That to me it boggles my mind that we would do that, especially out in the back of Lindemar. So I'm really against that. And I know that you can get marijuana pretty easily. I just don't see any reason to make it any easier than it already is to put it that close. And then that goes to my comment on edibles, which is, again, something that is new to society. There's a lot of study about how it's impacting society. Those studies aren't in yet. We don't quite know what the impact is going to be. We've already got 4 pieces of legislation in front of the California Senate that are going to attempt to further regulate edibles because it's already being seen as an issue, particularly edibles that are marketed as children's candy, which is amazing that someone would actually think to make money doing that, but people are doing it. And, I think we need to get, just, I'm not saying ban edibles forever, but I think it might be a slow approach is necessary to not allow these things into our community until we fully understand what's going on with them. And again, this is not for the medical side. This is purely for the recreational side. And as far as enforcement goes, I'm unconvinced that this can't be enforced. I'm just wholly unconvinced. I have not seen an argument that couldn't be done. So that's just my comments on what I heard tonight and what I've been hearing from the community as well. Quite frankly, I've been hearing from a lot of parents who are not thrilled at all with having these recreational facilities closer to their schools than necessary.
Thank you, Commissioner Campbell. Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. First, wanted to thank everybody who came out to the meeting and gave their 2 cents to us. We really appreciate it. We listen very carefully, and it oftentimes has a big impact on how we're thinking. So thank you all for coming out. And thank you for Commissioner Campbell for giving your impassioned speech against edibles in the recreational retail context. I think I'm okay with that. I think you've persuaded me. So I'm okay with just having the edibles on the medical side and not having them be permissible on the recreational side. That's just my own view. Park Mall is a big problem. I agree with the speakers and agree with Commissioner Campbell. I got to imagine if the Terra Nova administrators were here right now, they would be just pulling their hair out, going, "What are you guys, crazy?" So I don't know how to address that, but it seems like Park Mall is not the right place for a dispensary. I know there's been some discussion about certain owners of the shopping centers not being friendly to, certain owners might be friendly, certain owners might not be friendly to or open to renting to a medical dispensary. I don't think that it makes sense for us to make regulations in response to what private owners may or may not be considering that Kimco could sell their ownership to another operator tomorrow. We just don't even know. They could change their policies tomorrow. We don't even know. So I don't think it makes sense for us to say, well, we've opened a fair amount, but it's not really meaningful because Kimco won't do X, Y, Z. So anyway, I don't think we should be persuaded by the current policies of certain private owners of shopping centers. I had a couple questions for staff based on some of the comments. The first was that there's something that's bugging me about the lottery process. And it does seem like there's the current operators bring to the table a lot of experience and a lot of know-how and expertise. And it seems that by not weighing that factor at all in the decision about who gets to be considered for a license and who doesn't, it seems like we're flushing that down the toilet. We're not taking advantage of all of the experience that they've built up in running a successful dispensary. So some of those arguments that the speakers made, I think they resonated with me. My question is so currently the process that's being proposed for determining who gets a license and not, in the first instance, the threshold is it's a lottery process. It's just picking out of a hat. Is that it?
Could be a bowl or some other mechanism.
It could be a bowl.
But yes, so the problem that we're contemplating or struggling with is the fact that we don't know what the demand will be in this initial phase of applications. And so we have a numerical limit of 6 dispensaries as the draft ordinance is written currently. And if we were to have 10 or 20 applications, we're not sure how we could reasonably analyze and prepare those for hearing. The amount of work that goes into a use permit application for outdoor seating, it's a fair amount of work. When you double or triple or quadruple the number of findings and detailed level of analysis, as would be the case with the findings for a marijuana use permit, and then to replicate that a dozen or more times, it's just not reasonable to expect that we can do that in an organized fashion.
So in that process, what you're contemplating is that we would be sifting through the 17 or 18 submissions? You wouldn't be making the first cut?
The process would be the lottery. So the applicants would pass their initial screening for a background check, move on to the next phase. Once they become a qualified applicant, we would assess the number of potential licenses. Assuming that number stays at 6, we would have 6 allocations, 20 applicants, for example. The lottery would be used to identify the first 6 that would come to public hearing. And then, assuming that not all of them were to be granted a marijuana use permit, we would then go next on the list. So we would establish a ranking priority order through the lottery and then work through them at the public hearing based on the number of licenses or permits that we could issue at that particular time.
It's just, like, let's say, for example, we end up getting 8 or 9, applications, and then there's no, if it just seems like not a great result that we're losing. And let's say, for example, that the 6 that are selected are not any of the existing operators. You're basically going to be, it just doesn't, I understand that there's a, is it possible that we could have the lottery kick in if the number of applicants exceeds a certain number? Like 10 or something like that, just in...
It's certainly possible. I'd like to hear from the planning director, if she would feel comfortable with that approach, and if so, at what level she would feel comfortable. I'd just like to add, though, with respect to the existing dispensaries, it's not clear that all of them would be eligible anyways, even with the reduced 200-foot childcare buffer. There are a number of the existing dispensaries that are still within even that reduced buffer, and so...
Is that right?
It's unclear to me how many of them would be eligible to even make an application.
Looks like we have another member of staff, is the chief of police,
Yes, good evening. If I may interject to that, Dan Stadler, your chief of police. One of the things that we thought about too when moving forward with this is, I want to preface this by saying that I have no doubt that of the places that are open in town right now, there's probably some of those places, perhaps even all of them, that could be successful, responsible business owners that would never give the city, nor would ever give the police department a day of trouble. That's very possible. I can guarantee, I would go out on a limb and say there's probably some of them at least. So this is nothing against those folks and their business practices. But in my position for the past couple of years, all of the calls regarding people who want to open marijuana businesses in the city of Pacifica come to me. They want to know, where are you at with that? As soon as they passed the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, and then of course as soon as Prop 64 passed, my phone lines were going crazy. People wanted information. What can we do? I cannot count the number of times, at least 15 or 20 times where I'm talking to people on the phone and they're telling me, look, I want to do things legally. Right now, it is illegal in your town. As we sit here today, it is illegal to operate a marijuana business in Pacifica. And they tell me they want to operate legally, they want to be above the board. They will watch what we're doing, and they will wait and see what happens in Pacifica. Now, people that open businesses, that are entrepreneurs, the ones that are open right now, and maybe very good ones. But when putting this together, if we consider the existing businesses as having some sort of preference we have to give them preference over the other businesses. What does that say to the 15 or 20 people that I've already spoken to that have told me, I want to operate legally, I want to be above the board and be responsible, and I want to follow the law?
And your response to them was?
Well, we
you
haven't
can't
got that far yet.
Oh, okay.
We haven't got that far yet because there's been no decisions made by this body or by
But when you're
council.
talking to them on the phone?
Yes.
Your response to them is, you can't do it right now because it's not legal?
That's correct. They want to know, how do I apply? And I've heard many people from existing businesses saying, we tried to apply. Well, there's no mechanism for applying because it's illegal right now. It's not legal in Pacifica. So again, setting the business practices aside again, I'm sure there's some very responsible people operating in town right now. But what are we going to tell the other 15 or 20 that have been patiently waiting? So that comes into a little bit of our methodology and what we're trying to do. We're trying to be fair to everybody.
While you're up there, can I put, I got you loud and clear. But I have a question for you while you're up there.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Put you on the spot.
Sure.
So, a couple questions really for you. First of all, in terms of looking at the different locations possible for putting these dispensaries in, did you have, currently the current draft says a max of 6. Did you think that number is too big, too small, just right? What was your view?
I agree with what staff report says. I believe 6 is a reasonable number. I know when we initially brought this to council the first time, we had talked about 3. There seemed to be some back and forth of whether there should be 3 or 6. If we put 6 in this community, my department will be able to assist and help.
All right, because I was thinking 6 is a kind of a high number.
Well, again, I think
Unintended.
from a law enforcement perspective, we have 6 responsible business owners. Well, I believe we can absolutely make that work. If we have 6 and 5 are irresponsible, that could be a police problem. But I would hope that our vetting process, and once we go through the background process and the process before this body, that we would have the right people in the businesses, and we wouldn't have to worry about that.
And did you think that the Park Mall area raised any special considerations?
My concern over the Park Mall area is that it is heavily foot traffic by kids, being the Ortega School and Terranova High School is there, but probably not more than any other areas where they may go.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Well, as long as the Chief's up there, anybody else have any questions for the Chief? I'm going to, okay, thank you. Commissioner Behringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I didn't have the benefit of the last meeting, so I'm kind of trying to catch up with you guys. But I think the one point that I was going to make is this is a brand-new use. In terms of how this works, there isn't a lot of data or track record in terms of what the impact of this use is going to be on our community. And so in consideration of that, I think it's totally appropriate to go slowly in terms of how we try to regulate where we put these, how far they are located away from things that we believe are vulnerable to a bad influence. I think that's totally appropriate because 3 years from now, we're going to have more information, more data, more experience in whether certain things were a good idea or certain things went horribly wrong and had unintended consequences. So I initially was a bigger fan of the 1,000-foot radius, to cover that. And then my thinking was that radius could always be, made smaller if the operational capabilities of the people that open these things demonstrated to those of us in our community that there wasn't an extraordinary adverse impact, because we all know there could be. There this is a possibility. This is like a liquor store. In some regards, there could be some impacts on our community that we would probably prefer not to have. I think that one of the things I'd like to see, and I had talked to the planning director about this, I think there needs to be a buffer between units. I don't know that we necessarily want to cluster these all in one area. There's some land use planning theory that some uses that may be perceived by some people as undesirable. You cluster them together, get them all in one place so they don't impact the entire community. I don't know that recreational marijuana dispensaries necessarily fall into that category, so I'm thinking maybe we should separate some distance between the ones that we allow to go forward. I don't know what that number is, but I think we would prefer that they not all be in one cluster. At least that would be my thinking, at least initially.
Chair, if I could respond to the last point from Commissioner Behringer.
Sure.
Please.
The zoning system that staff has proposed for the medical and non-medical retail uses relies on an overlay zone concept with designated overlay zones, the Lindemar overlay, Park Mall, Rockaway, et cetera. The way the zoning is crafted is such that no more than 2 could locate within any of those contiguous zones. And so unless we were to increase the number beyond 2, it would seem that the small area of each zone would be adversely impacted by a buffer requirement between uses. With there being only 2 and the limited locations 1 could locate, it would effectively, in most cases, probably result in only 1 per zone. So I just wanted to add that observation.
Okay, all right. I mean, you guys are the land use professionals, but I understand there's 2 schools of thought. You want them far apart, or you want them all together, so whatever hurt there is only in one area where maybe theoretically it could be designed to accommodate that. The other concern that I had was because this is new, and we don't want to have a permanence attached to whatever decisions we make, that the licensing or the land use, it has a short duration so that we can rethink it after a 2 or a 3-year period. How you get to that point, I'll defer to your judgment. If you want to do it through the licensing side, I'm fine with that. If you want to do it on the land use side, whatever you think is the most effective. But I do think it's important that we limit the duration of it so that we can change course if we need to. We may not. We may say, hey, this is working great, we'll just continue on with it. But I think we need to have that flexibility so that whatever downside we experience, we can rectify it without causing a lot of problems for the community. But other than that, I think, Proposition 64, I think the voters have spoken. I think we just need to be prudent in how we implement it in our community so that, the people have access to it that want to have access to it, but it doesn't have an adverse impact on our community in general.
Thank you, Commissioner Behringer. Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of comments, and I'll just read them off as I'm going through it. I don't really have a problem with the edibles, both recreational or in the medical field. I think that the state will regulate that with labeling eventually, so I don't really have that much of an issue. It is an evolving. It's not going to be perfect, but as a commissioner, I really don't have any say. I think in the edible, I'm for edibles on both accounts. One thing that we asked the planning department to do is to go back and do an overlay that was a little less restrictive, and I think they've done that, and I think it's a reasonable map that they've done with the 600-foot buffer to the schools and 200 feet for daycare, so I'm comfortable with that. Does it open up as much as some people want? No. Does it open up too much that other people don't want? Yeah, it does, but I think it's a reasonable set of restrictions with the way that it was presented. The other thing that I did notice is that, we spoke, one of my fellow commissioners spoke about Kimco not renting to people, but we should look in the future and what they might rent to in the future. And I think if you take that approach, which is probably a logical approach, you take it as far as the existing the dispensaries that are in town. It's like, well, if you're going to look at the long-term approach, are the regulations set up appropriately to analyze those new businesses coming into town? Do we have the regulations set within this ordinance to evaluate that? And I think we do in the long-term aspect of it. I don't think we should parse out the existing businesses versus the new businesses. I think that if they've demonstrated that they have a plan and they have the experience and they have the location, according to the map that we have, there's nothing more preventing them from doing anything else any outside party would do. So I do agree with the chief in that instance. I think that in general, the plan has to be as much as we can evaluate whether or not a new dispensary that comes into town can operate and is appropriately operating within the ordinance that we have. And I think that there's enough restriction in there. So I'm comfortable with the restrictions that we have. There is a restriction on the overlay map, which I think is appropriate, in the 2 and 2 and 2. Now, are there going to be 2 dispensaries in a particular location that we specified? Well, probably not right now, because it kind of sounds like certain real estate people don't want to rent to the dispensaries. So you're going to self-regulate it in the location itself, and it will evolve as it goes on. But I think the regulations need to be there, and I think that we've established that. So I don't really have that much issue with the way this was presented in the staff report. I think that they've done what we've, at least what I understand that we've asked them to do, and I understand that some people have some issues with other parts of it, but as far as a commissioner, I'm for what was presented to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. Commissioner Clifford.
Well, Commissioner Cooper said what I wanted to say.
I'm sorry.
Much more eloquently than I probably would have managed. I am happy with the overlay as it is. And in terms of people renting to the various dispensaries, that's really not up for us to decide. That's a personal decision by those property owners as to whether or not they want to rent to this particular type of operation. So I'm not going to get overly involved in that. Basically, I'm happy with everything staff has done and would vote for it as presented. I still have my overriding concern about the recreational in terms of what the federal government will do, but that's people have heard that before, and I haven't heard a lot of support for my position. So as things go right now, I would vote for what's been presented to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Clifford. I just had a couple of, questions and points of clarification. First, I wanted to ask my fellow commissioner, Commissioner Behringer, he'd expressed some concerns about, or some interest in seeing sort of a limited use, or it's not quite how he said it, a durational concerns. I'm trying to understand whether or not the thought was we'd be looking at essentially use permits, not quite the term we're using. I know there's a specific term for it, but a limited term on those permits that would be subject to another discretionary hearing. Is that what you had in mind? I wanted to make sure that we and staff understood what you were asking.
Yeah, I mean, if you're of a similar mindset to my opinion that, there's a lot about this we don't know, and I don't think we should be attaching any long-term implications to this ordinance right now in terms of decisions we're making. And I know the business people out in the audience are not going to be happy to hear that, but I think, our job is to look out for the best interests of the community, and I think we need to have the flexibility to, if some of this turns out to be a bad idea, for whatever reason, or has some unintended consequences, that we need to rectify those. We need to have a mechanism to stop it and change direction, or if it's going well, then it's a non-issue and we move on. So from my perspective, it could either be attacked as the land use permit, which the marijuana use permit or a conditional use permit could have a shorter duration, or as I think the planning director and staff were recommending, that the license to operate within the facility would have a shorter duration. So either way, there is a shortened time period on it so that we can reevaluate it if we want to.
I'd be sort of curious about sort of the vesting rights and things like that we might be concerned about.
That is exactly our concern. And so, but we also heard Commissioner Behringer's, concerns about this. And so we felt that the way to approach this was to make sure that the land use permit and the license was linked, and so that the license permit through the police department is the one that receives the annual review. And if that is ever not valid for any reason, revoked or otherwise, then the use permit, by conditions and the terms of the ordinance, would then no longer be effective.
But the license itself wouldn't necessarily be controlled or driven by sort of just concerns the community might be having with respect to what we don't like, for example. I mean, again,
Correct.
If you've got an operator who's doing everything by the book, but nevertheless there are some concerns that might be in the nature of, well, we just don't feel like we like this form of use in this area anymore. I'm not clear on, again, whether or not that would be an adequate basis for rescinding a license. I know it gets a little hypothetical, but I just wanted to.
So the public safety license ordinance hasn't been drafted yet, but the intention is to have a ministerial annual review process that would include review of whether or not the initial operations plan, security plan, and site plan were being adhered to.
Yes.
And I think in those plans, some of the community concerns regarding impact on the neighborhood, nuisances, illegal encounters with underage persons, et cetera, would all be considered and would be grounds for revocation of the license.
Okay, thank you. I had one other question, then maybe I'll have a couple comments. So I was looking at page 12 of the packet, and frankly, I should have noted this earlier, and I apologize for not. But these are supplemental findings for manufacturers, and this is the first time I really started to focus on this. And these are supplemental findings that the commission would be expected to make in the context of manufacturers. And, you know, one of these supplemental findings, the second bullet point on page 12, makes reference to the manufacturing operation, including adequate quality control measures to ensure any marijuana product manufactured at the site meets industry standards. And I was a little concerned about, frankly, well, at least I'm more concerned about my personal competence to really weigh in on something like that. And I was sort of curious about, is that fairly standard that a planning commission would be sort of passing on something like that, which seems fairly almost more health and safety oriented, something you'd expect maybe a health department or some other entity to sort of weigh in on. I was a little concerned about that particular finding, whether that's really an appropriate thing for us to be expected to pass on.
I think I can address that. So I think that's a point well taken. However, the draft regulations that the state just circulated specifically for manufacturing include a number of quality control measures that must be complied with in order to maintain the state license. And what we were attempting to do here was to sort of mirror that licensing process. And while the state license is not necessarily a land use license, it is a required condition to maintain this land use license.
Okay, and I expect that to the extent that we were required to make a finding like that, staff would do the best they could to get us whatever we needed to be able to pass on something like that. Aside from that, I guess I'd want to echo what some other commissioners have said. I know we've gone kind of back and forth with respect to buffers and, sort of, distances and, edibles in, edibles out, that sort of thing. And I think staff has, frankly, implemented sort of certainly the will of the majority of the commissioners as articulated over the course of a couple of meetings. So I think that they've done a really good job of bringing us to this point and trying to incorporate, all the various pieces that we've offered. I've had some concerns along the way, including my abiding concern with respect to outdoor cultivation, which I frankly am personally opposed to as things are drafted here. But I think I'd be prepared to support the ordinance as it's currently presented. Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I think you brought up a good point. I had one more follow-up to the annual reviews for the licensing. Are those made public? Are the public, the annual reviews for the licensing, are those made public so the public can have access to those on the reviews of each?
Those would be public documents,
Okay,
yes.
Cool. The other element that I, just being a little educated on the dispensaries is the education that I think a lot of the dispensaries provide to the community and an outreach program and with our schools. I mean, those are all things I think that the dispensaries could do upon themselves as good neighbors to the community. But then again, it comes to the awareness as well, and I certainly don't see a Walgreens or a CVS doing outreach to the community in that form and sense. So I don't want to put too many restrictions, obviously, on that. But I think as far as being a good neighbor, I think the dispensaries in general have a philosophy of doing well for the community, doing well for their patients, et cetera. And I think that if they were to promote that on the outskirts, which I'm sure they do, would just promote the service of what we're trying to do here. But I think they're all good comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify on your comments in response to Commissioner Behringer's thoughts about a limited duration, sort of like a renewable license. If this were to go into effect as drafted, the operators, the retail operators, would need to apply to renew their license once a year? Is that it?
The holder of the public safety license and again, it hasn't been drafted, but it will be going to the city council along with this ordinance. The intention of that, the public safety license, is that there is an annual renewal required, that the license expires 365 days after its issuance. And that license is specific to the licensee and the holder. It does not run with the land or is not related to the land that the
Okay.
use permit is related to.
That helps clarify. And that sounds good. Another question, now we're in hypothetical land. Let's say, for example, this becomes enacted and an application comes before the Planning Commission to receive a license, and the operator has identified a location. I assume that all of the applications, they will already have identified a location, or no?
So one of the elements of the initial application to the police chief is that the applicant has identified a location where the property owner has indicated support for the application. And so we're trying to screen out those difficult circumstances where they may not have yet identified a location to increase the likelihood they'll make it through the process.
Okay. And so, so let's say that application comes to us, and I just don't like the location. The operator's great. They've got a great business plan. They're bringing all this expertise to the table, but let's say it's Park Mall, and gosh darn it, I think it's too close to the high school. I don't think it's a great idea. Would I be able to vote against that application just solely on that basis?
I think you would need to articulate some very specific reasons why the proximity to the high school was a concern for you in making the required findings. And I think when looking at the locations and the buffers, it would be best to make sure the buffer fits the general desire. It may be, it requires some very specific reasons why that would be of concern to deny the permit.
And so those concerns would probably have to be tied into public health and safety, something like that.
Presumably any of the findings that are required, many of which relate to public health and safety, but not all directly in that fashion.
Commissioner Gordon, one of the required findings that the Planning Commission has to make to issue a marijuana use permit is that the proposed location is not likely to have a potentially adverse effect on the health, peace, or safety of persons due to its operation. So that is a finding that has to be made in addition to the finding that they are not within one of the buffers of schools, daycares, et cetera.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Sounds like there's some discretion there. Okay. So I'm also in favor, along with a lot of my fellow commissioners, of the plan as drafted.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell, looks like you had a comment.
Just a quick follow-up question on the finding that we would make. The burden for making that finding, as far as data or public health and safety concerns, falls on?
You.
Yes.
I read it in a tweet.
Thank you. Not as much discretion as I think we have.
I might add, I mean, if Commissioner Gordon, if you feel like you're likely to feel that way, should any application come forth from Park Mall because of its location, I mean, the center is not very large. So if one spot would be concerning, they'd likely all be concerning. And so that may be an indication that from the legislative component of this in identifying the zones, that it's not the right place. We went through and found more places because that was the direction that we got. I'm not saying that Park Mall is the best location or that I think that it necessarily should be on there, given the character of the community and things we've heard from residents that live nearby, but it's there because it can be there. But this is the opportunity to say, you know what, let's scratch it from the list. We just think that there's too many reasons why it's not the right place for marijuana uses, and that's entirely acceptable. And now's the time that I would suggest doing that if you feel that way.
Could we do that and still, okay, I guess I'm confused.
I guess the notion is, would you be looking to amend the materials in front of us so as to delete from the overlay zones that particular shopping center? Is that essentially the question?
That's correct.
Yeah, I guess I would be in favor of that. So that would be my only change.
All right. Any other discussion? Looks like Commissioner Campbell.
I'll take what I can get. I would be in favor of that, too.
Commissioner Cooper.
I'm not stuck on Park Pacifica. I think the planning department applied the rules that we provided them. I'd like to make a motion tonight, so I'm willing to listen.
Okay. Commissioner Behringer.
Oh, I was hoping he was going to make a motion so I could second it.
Well, I guess what I would say is, and I think the point, as I understood it, was to, again, the point of these overlay zones, and frankly, the point of the dispensaries, whether they're recreational, medical, as far as I understood, was to serve our community of Pacifica. Frankly, I don't have much focus or concern about people coming in from out of town. So the fact that it's, and I really don't, that's not a market I'm necessarily, myself as a commissioner, interested in really trying to facilitate. So the fact that we've got an overlay zone that sits back there available for that particular, portion of our community is not troubling to me. And I think, in fact, we ought to distribute these around. And that is a place where, frankly, it could be. So I'd be disinclined, frankly, to support a change to delete it. But that's just my perspective. Commissioner Clifford.
I'm also disinclined to support that particular change. I know we've talked about the schools, but there are also a lot of senior facilities in that neighborhood and who might actually get great benefit from having a dispensary in the Park Mall. And that's that.
Thank you, Commissioner Clifford. Commissioner Cooper.
If everybody's done, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the attached resolution initiating the amendments and recommending approval to the City Council, Attachment A, with no changes.
Commissioner Behringer.
I will second that motion.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and take a vote on that. Looks like we have 5 votes in favor, 1 vote against, Commissioner Campbell, so the motion passes. Thank you. Okay.
Go on next.
So we'll move on then to our new public hearing. Well, actually, we have a couple, but looks like one's going to be continued. Use permit UP 96506 and specific plan SP 16217, filed by Tracy Lum on behalf of T-Mobile for relocation of 6 pole-mounted panel antennas from an existing freestanding sign and installation of 3 additional pole-mounted panel antennas with an alternate freestanding sign and installation of rooftop equipment in 2 areas. The recommended action is to continue public hearing on this matter to June 19th, 2017. Anything else that needs to be said about this other than us acting on that recommendation?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Behringer.
Yeah, I have just a quick question. Do we have a shot clock issue on that?
We verified the shot clock, and because we had some flexibility remaining, we were able to continue the item.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooper, do you have a question on that?
No, I would make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that we continue the item use permit 95606 and specific plan SP 162-17 to the June 19th, 2017 agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Clifford?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, motion is second. Let's go ahead and vote. Okay, that carried unanimously. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is Site Development Permit PSD 80916 and Use Permit UP 7216, Parking Exception PE 16616, and Sign Permit S11816, submitted by Todd Duell of Kimco Realty for demolition of a former Denny's restaurant building and construction of a new 4,500 square foot multi-tenant commercial building with 2 restaurants, outdoor seating, wall signs, and a freestanding sign, a reduction in required parking, and an amended master sign program at 500 Lindemar Boulevard, APN 023-041-270 in Pacifica. The recommended CEQA status on this project is Class 3 categorically exempt, CEQA Guidelines Section 15303, and the recommended action on this is to approve as conditioned. Could I get a staff report, please?
Honorable Chair and Commissioners, Associate Planner Christian Murdoch. The project before you involves demolition of an existing restaurant building which formerly housed the Denny's restaurant, replacement of the building with a two-tenant commercial building of approximately 4,500 square feet, outdoor seating areas at the front and rear of the new building, authorization for any restaurant type in the zoning regulations, a parking exception for a 17-space deficiency in required on-site parking, and a new freestanding sign. The building would feature a modern design with horizontal siding, smooth plaster, and metal accent bands. The materials and colors are designed to be complementary to the proposed freestanding sign, which, to clarify, would replace a previously approved sign in the same location which was demolished and removed after suffering significant winter storm damage. In consideration of the parking exception, staff has included conditions of approval requiring additional on-site signage to notify shopping center visitors and employees of additional parking behind the Safeway building, and a requirement that future leases between Kimco and its tenants require tenants to have their employees park behind the same building. Overall, staff thinks the project would be an improvement to remove an obsolete building and replace it with a modern multi-tenant building, would result in a substantial aesthetic improvement to the site, would not result in significant operational differences from the previous site, and staff recommends approval of the project as conditioned. Staff is available to answer questions, and we are also joined by our consulting architect, Frank Fuller, who can assist with any questions about the building's design or potential alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Any questions from the commissioners for staff? Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't know how this works. Commissioner Behringer probably would know how this works, but the questions for staff. So it looks like Panda is going to be the proposed new tenant? Or is that just, hey, this is one possibility?
We believe there is specific interest, as indicated by the applicant, for Panda Express to open, and we also believe the second space would be occupied by Starbucks. They would relocate from their current location in the center to this location, if approved.
And really, one of my only concerns is parking. But I guess you would, so when you guys looked at it, were you thinking, okay, Denny's was there, they didn't have any special parking areas, so, and it worked out just fine. Is that kind of what your thinking was, or?
Well, I think we acknowledge that the center has high demand for parking in the central parking area. If you look overall at the center, though, as we should with the zoning analysis, 2/3 of the parking is available in the center and 1/3 in peripheral areas. That peripheral parking is rarely used, and so we've tried to encourage and find ways to push more parking to that location.
And when you say, I'm sorry, when you say peripheral parking, are you talking about the parking that's, you mean to the east of Safeway?
That's right, behind the main inline building, correct. And for our parking analysis, for a parking exception, the commission needs to identify that there's a hardship with providing the required parking. There's a practical hardship. In this case, it's an infill site. There's not a lot of opportunity for the applicant to provide more parking. In my mind, that's a practical hardship. The applicant has taken measures with the design to try to increase non-automobile trips by including bicycle parking racks, which were not a feature of the previous site, making a pedestrian connection at the rear outdoor seating area for the intersection of Lindemar and Coast Highway to capture more of those trips where people may be parked in the area and making use of the beach in the commercial area. So they've taken measures that we think are reasonable to offset the difference. And our analysis started from the baseline of Denny's and the net change, not the overall center. We didn't think it was realistic for them to make up for all of the spaces that may be deficient elsewhere for the aggregate center.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. What's the existing height of the current Denny's restaurant there?
I don't have that figure handy. I don't believe it's as tall as the proposed building.
Okay. Do you know the existing, that sign that was taken down with the existing applicable square footages of the display areas in that sign?
I don't. The trouble with that is that the sign that was there does not match the sign that was approved in the sign program. And so the details of that sign area are not readily available. And with the sign being removed, we didn't have the opportunity to go back and recalculate that.
Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners?
I had one more question, and
Sure.
maybe I wasn't listening properly. The employee parking that's for this particular expansion, they're going to move it off to the backside. Are they doing anything with the current employees of Safeway and their other tenants? Are they going to move them to the back as well?
So I'm not aware of anything they can do currently. One of the conditions of approval that staff's proposed is that when future leases are amended or signed with new tenants, that they would insert a provision to require employee parking in that rear area. I'm not aware of a mechanism to require that of current tenants under their current leases.
My only question is that if you, from the front of the building to the back of the building, they're really two different worlds. I mean, the back of the building is quite the industrial area, and I would worry about employee safety, lighting, and everything else that's there. So that's my only concern there, and I think that Kimco, as a retail agent, would want to do the best for their business as they possibly can, which would be then to transfer those employees in the back, but without proper safety in that back area, I'm not sure how usable that parking lot is. I know that there's an electric station back there, which is a really nice feature, but getting there at nighttime might be a little challenge, and if they had any plans to do any upgrades to that area.
I mean, we could perhaps hear from the applicant at the appropriate time if additional pedestrian lighting for safety may be appropriate, if they'd be willing to incorporate that, or the commission could omit that condition of approval. Staff has just tried whatever means it found to try to offset the deficiency of on-site parking.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from commissioners? I don't see anything else. At this point, I guess we'd go ahead and open the public hearing. I'd invite the applicant, if the applicant is represented here, to come forward and share anything additional that the applicant chooses to with the commission.
Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Todd Duell. I'm the Director of Construction for Kimco Realty. We are the property owners of 500 Lindemar, which is the Lindemar Shopping Center. Excuse me. We've been waiting a long time to get here, so tonight is very exciting for us. We're very pleased to be presenting a new project to replace, as Christian said, old operational Denny's with a new modern designed building. We've got a multi-tenant structure set up. We believe we can bring in some exciting new tenants to the center. We're really looking forward to getting this project going. Christian and I did speak about the parking issue. We are fully behind the additional directional signage to direct people when overflow parking is going to be required to the rear or to the east of the center. But we also share Commissioner Cooper's concerns about overall safety. There are centers in the Kimco portfolio where these type of things are part of the leases. We currently have four vacancies at Lindemar Center. Everything else is currently under lease, and we don't have the ability to go back and amend those leases at this time. And that includes the options that these tenants may have. As they expire, we certainly could insert this language, but again, we also share some concerns with the overall safety of our employees leaving late at night. We would be open to continue this discussion, look at it at an interval that would be appropriate for the commission, but would also like to see if we could get around this one.
I just had a quick question.
Please.
Could just, at least at an anecdotal level, could you give us some information on sort of the time horizons of the existing leases and options?
I can, as Director of Construction. I do have my Director of Real Estate with me. If Ramfi? Sure.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ramfi Ancelovisi. I'm Director of Real Estate, focused on leasing for Kimco. That's a tough question to answer, only because we have Linamar is kind of an anomaly in that you have so many shop spaces.
Right.
And so you have leases rolling through, let's say, next year. We're even talking to those tenants today. So all the way through probably 2030. So again, it's a tough question to answer, but perhaps there's something I could, go ahead, I'm sorry. Go
Well,
ahead.
what I was trying to get at is what kind of time horizon we'd be looking at for making these kinds of amendments going forward that might impact the sort of parking practices.
Sure.
And maybe on a square footage basis. I mean, just sort of, as you look at kind of the totality of the park, or I'm sorry, the totality of the center, on what kind of time horizons might major chunks of the operations be renewing leases?
Right. I would say right now we've done a really good job of renewing tenants for the most part. I would say you would probably they probably roll in the early, 20s, somewhere around the 2025, somewhere around there. The other difficulty or other challenges that we have is that some of these leases have options that are fixed. So it's one of these, yes, we want it, no, we don't situations. And so that doesn't allow us the opportunity to implement any type of changes like this parking issue. Again, there are many challenges in these leases that we have, and we try our best to implement as much as we can as they roll, where the tenant doesn't have any more options, and at that point we can start putting things in their leases.
I appreciate that. Commissioner Behringer, did you have a quick question?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask you a question. I know most likely that Safeway has a prohibition on employee parking and they're protected parking in front of their building.
Mm-hmm.
So they're protected and generally are in all their leases. And I'm sure that's the case here. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Most
Okay.
anchor leases have what's called a protected area in general, whether
Right.
it's parking, changes to the common area, things like that.
Exactly, and that makes sense because they're an anchor tenant. What we're really talking about, I guess, and because I have another question that maybe you can help me on that. We're talking about the area that would be, immediately east of where you're proposing to build a new building. That's the area that's going to be more intensely used now than it has been certainly for the last, I guess, year and a half or however long it's been since Denny's closed. So whatever we can do to make sure that parking is available to these two tenants, I think we need to do, and that brings to mind beach parking. You have people parking and going to the beach in that lot all the time.
Sure.
I live there, I walk down there all the time, and I see a lot of people pulling their cars in, loading up their beach stuff and walking across the street. So maybe, and I don't know that we can't really incorporate that into the approval tonight, but I think that's something you might want to take back and talk to your operations people, because that would really help make sure that we have this parking for these, so these two tenants can be successful. And that's going to involve your security guys paying attention to it and doing something with it.
Absolutely. And that, actually, you brought up a good point. There's two parts to this. The hard part is implementing in the leases, and then it's enforcing it. So that's a second layer to this issue. We do have on-site security, but at that point, do you do a ticketing system? Do you do a towing system? So it adds another challenge to it, but I agree with you. It's something we should address.
Yeah.
And I know we're cutting a little bit into your presentation time, so we'll give you some consideration at the back end. But I have another commissioner with a question. Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure if you're the right person or the Director of Construction is, but I'll ask it. My question is focused on not the area immediately to the east of the proposed construction site, but the area behind Safeway. And I haven't actually ever been there at night in that area. Is there lighting there at night as it currently stands?
Yeah, there is.
There's currently site lighting in the back area.
Okay, so it's proper. Go ahead.
Obviously, it's the back of the building. There aren't as many storefront lights right there, so it certainly is a little darker than what is out in front of the center.
Okay. And so do you think as it stands now that it poses a security risk? In other words, don't answer that. As your lawyer, do not answer that.
He's not.
I guess let me rephrase it. Would Kimco consider plans to upgrade the lighting back there, just as a?
Actually, we are. As part of our corporate policy nationally, we are installing LED lighting throughout all of our sites, the site lighting, which greatly increases the downward illumination to the parking areas, while not directing off lighting, which would go into the neighborhood. I should have a date that that is going to be implemented here at Lindemar. I don't. I do know that this program is scheduled to finish up by 2020.
2020, okay.
We have close to 800 centers across, across the nation. So
Yes.
it's a 5-year implementation.
Right, okay.
But there is,
It's good to hear that there's a plan. And
yeah, absolutely.
okay, thanks.
So if you could hold just one more second, Commissioner Cooper, looks like you had a comment or
I can wait
question.
till this presentation is done if you want.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and finish up if there's anything else you wanted to share with us, and then I'll unleash Commissioner Cooper.
Other than we're looking forward to getting this project moving, we have invested a great deal of time, as staff has, in order to create a building that we both feel very comfortable moving forward. We think it'll be a very strong anchor there at the Coast Highway and Lindemar. We look forward to seeing people out on the patio enjoying the weather and being able to enjoy our center.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of questions for you. I mean, one of my big concerns is obviously the visual portion of it in our community and where it stands. The rendering that you gave for the Panda Express and the elevated roof level of where the Panda Express sign is a lot different than what's currently out there. So the visual that you get when you go to that light is you can kind of see towards the shopping center and see what's behind it. And this would, kind of obstruct from that view. Is there any, besides an architectural feature, is there any reason that roof is so high? Is that just strictly an architectural feature? Because I know Panda Express, and they're pretty low sometimes in the area.
Yes, it is an architectural feature. It is at a prominent corner. We do want to make a statement. There certainly have been changes over the years when Denny's was originally constructed and what current restaurant needs are for minimum heights, ceilings in order to get the equipment in that is certainly different from what Denny's proposed, I think, back in the early 80s. So there is some mechanical, technical reasons why it is higher, but it also is an aesthetic feature as well.
Okay, and does it exceed the roof line of the existing buildings that are adjacent to it, like where Radio Shack was and all those other places?
I'm not sure.
Not sure, okay.
I'm not sure what the existing height of the Radio Shack parapet is. I have to check on that.
Okay. I guess I have two more questions. Would Kimco be willing to move up their LED upgrades if they're to get approval for this project?
I can't speak to that. That comes from an operational group that has set those. I certainly could say that we have met with the commission. We have approvals. Can we possibly move things around to get it moved up? But I don't have the ability to say that.
Okay. The other question I had was that if I look at the standardized signage plan, I guess you're looking at this drawing here. It's sheet number 5. It's the standardized signage plan from the existing sign that was there to this new sign.
That's the sign program.
Yeah, the sign program. This sign program? So the sign that you're proposing exceeds the limits of the sign in the sign program, and I'm very conscious of how large those signs are. They're very distracting. As much as I want people, obviously, to go to the tenants that are there, I think it's great for business, et cetera. Keeping that at a minimum really is kind of concern to mine. And I noticed that the outskirts of the sign of your signage program is 10 feet for the outside limits of that sign, and your canopy extends over 12 feet out from that. I like to see it within the parameters of your signage program to maybe scale it back just a little bit. And then it's also higher than what the sign that was there before. The sign that was there before looks like their signage program shows a maximum of 18 feet, and you're currently showing 20 feet. So I'd like to see those within those parameters. And again, this is really for the visual effect. I don't want to see a huge sign as the main attraction to your center. It should be obviously the businesses that are there. So that would be my concern. Is that something that you'd be willing to do if you?
I think we could definitely work within those parameters.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Behringer.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to come at the architectural unique aspects of this pad building compared to the rest of the center from a slightly different perspective from my fellow commissioner. Obviously, this center's dated, and I don't know how Kimco approaches renovation of their centers, but is there a possibility that this architectural style could be incorporated into a renovation of the center? Do you have any information on if and when that would ever happen? Because I think it would make a huge difference in how this center is perceived, certainly in our community and then other parts of the coast.
I couldn't disagree more, or agree more, excuse me.
Okay.
Can I speak to the timing of something like that happening?
Well, I'd like you to talk about the possibility, and then if you want to talk about timing, I'm willing to hear that too.
It certainly is part of a possibility.
Okay.
We are always looking at our existing centers, and I just might add that this is a Kimco core site, meaning that we have 100% ownership in this. This is a long-term hold. There was news a couple years ago that Kimco was selling the property. Well, we were actually buying our partners out. We had a 15% share in this shopping center. We bought them out. We have this wholly as a core site now. So my point is that we're going to be around at Lindemar for a long time with no intent to sell out of our core portfolio. That being said, we are on a coast. There are many elements, wind, rain, salt water, that will affect the buildings over time, and it will be renovated at some point. I just don't have an opportunity to say when or if or when that will happen.
Well, you know, and again, I wasn't trying to totally put you on the spot, but I was curious about it because this is so substantially different architecturally than anything else in the center. Even though it could be considered a pad, it's still a multi-tenant building, and I was thinking, well, maybe this is a precursor to a planned renovation of the center, which is, in my humble opinion, long overdue, and I think would benefit. Maybe justifying, you know, your leasing guy would be happier if he could justify the rents that you're charging with a renovated center that's more consistent with current, you know, shopping center approach and design and such. The other question I was going to ask you is, I noticed in your sign program that you don't allow logos on the parapet signs. You just have a channel letter program.
Correct.
And it's fairly pedestrian. But I did notice Panda's got their logo, and I was hoping that the second tenant, whoever that may be, there's rumors around town that it might be Starbucks. Hopefully.
Rumors.
Hopefully it would be. But that there would be an opportunity for that tenant to have its logo on the west side, because what we're concerned about in our community is people come down the hill from, you know, from Half Moon Bay and south of us, and this is an important intersection for our community. When they come in, they see this. And I think you've done a really good job of making it attractive, invitive. I like the landscaping. I think it's going to be awesome. But I think, you know, if we could have other than just a pedestrian channel letter, you know, 18-inch internally illuminated letter, I think that's going to go a long way toward creating an upscale appeal to it.
They will be able to have a logo on the.
Okay. All right. Those are the only questions I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Behringer. Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive of the project. I saw the letter from Urban Field Studio where they contemplated rooftop use, but it looked like it may be ADA requirements or it wouldn't allow for the spacing, but was that vigorously discussed? Because that sure seems like a missed opportunity.
It was vigorously discussed, not only at staff level, but also internally at Kimco. The regional president here, used to be here, is now the CEO of the company. He was an active surfer at Lindemar. And the first thing he wanted was a rooftop area that could be used. And it was extremely difficult to get him off that idea just because of all the access issues that were required and associated with bringing an elevator into the project in order to get barrier-free access. So it was vigorously discussed.
Well, thank you. And if this plan would carry forward at some point through the rest of the facility, I had to think it would have a lot of support for putting rooftop, at least on some other parts of that, because Pacifica is so funny. There's getting an ocean view from a restaurant around town is
Would be
amazingly
outstanding.
difficult here. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, unless you've got anything else you want to present,
No,
that's the extent of our peppering of questions right now. So we're going to move on then to the public comment portion of this public hearing. I have one speaker card. If anybody else is interested in addressing the commission, please fill out a card so we know it. Tigurgis, I have the last name as Kimco. I assume that's a mistake. Otherwise, you're
I
probably
believe
doing
I
pretty
wrote
well.
that under topic.
So it's Mr. Big Stick. But
Yes.
anyway, why don't go ahead and share your comment with us.
Sure. Thank you for hearing me again. I'm Tiger Jest, World's Big Stick. I am an employee in one of the businesses in that Kimco shopping center, and so as I was hearing the idea of requiring employees to park behind Safeway, all of a sudden my mind just started lighting up. Before going to that particular point, the issue of beach parking was raised, and what occurred to me was while on the one hand it's free beach parking, I'm wondering the cost-benefit analysis of free beach parking versus that traffic maybe visiting those businesses. And it sounds like maybe the CEO might have some insight into whether or not the surfers parking in that lot might actually be spending some money at those businesses while they're using that parking. In terms of employees parking behind Safeway, forgive me for saying, an initial just gut impulse was it kind of seems almost insulting to ask somebody who's been working an 8-hour day, especially if they're on the side as far away from Safeway as possible, to then walk all the way to behind Safeway. It seems really inconsiderate to the people who are serving us, ultimately. That aside, I work with folk who have physical disabilities. I know that a lot of times the people at Safeway park on the side northern lot, and so it's out of the way of the main space, but simultaneously it's not all the way behind. People with disabilities then have an easier access. Also, young women or just in general, late at night, anybody walking. If lighting's good, that's much better, but that's still, the longer the walk, the more susceptible a person becomes. Meanwhile, what also occurred to me is, well, if that space behind is underutilized, that's an opportunity to figure out a way to utilize it. It's an opportunity also to bring attention to some of those, what traditionally are empty spaces around the Bank of America area. If somehow some innovation can come to pass where suddenly that parking space is really inviting, that's a great opportunity to get those spaces filled and drive traffic to those businesses that otherwise might not have the traffic just because they're not very visible that far back. And maybe a way to make that area more secure. And I know there's a security guard that is regularly patrolling the area, but if maybe instead there's 2 security guards and one is very visibly, constantly patrolling that back area so that there's always a physical presence of somebody, hey, I'm here, this area is safe because there's a person here protecting it. Don't know how viable that is, but it seems like light's great, a person protecting it is even better. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Big Stick. That was the only speaker card I had for this item. And unless there's anybody else who wants to speak to the matter, not seeing that there is, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'm going to bring this on back to my fellow commissioners. So what's the pleasure? Commissioner Gordon?
Thank you, Chair. I'm enthusiastically in favor of the design and the application as is. I think it looks great. I would be I think Commissioner Behringer's comments were very well taken about it being an upgrade to the shopping center and potentially a shape of things to come there. So I'm all in favor. I don't really have any other comments.
Commissioner Behringer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am also enthusiastically in support of this project. I only had one comment that I forgot to mention before. I think there's a real need for a pedestrian crosswalk between that parking magazine that's due east of this project. You're taking your life in your own hands, walking from that parking over to to Starbucks or where Radio Shack was located or Sally Beauty now. So somewhere along there needs to be a pedestrian crosswalk. Obviously, you can't put it too close to Lindemar because traffic would back up. It would be a traffic issue. But somewhere inboard of that, maybe down by where the driveway is to the back area would be, I'll leave it to you to determine where you put it, but it does need to be there so that people can cross from the parking to the shops without getting run over.
If I can.
Yes.
I'd be happy to continue to work with staff in order to find that. We do have some constraints there, but
Understand.
I'd be happy to continue to work with staff on
Okay.
that.
That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Behringer. Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, I'm in support of this project. Nice report by staff. I appreciate the applicant's discussion up here, and let's work.
Thank you. Commissioner Clifford?
Yes, I'm also in favor of this project, and I do appreciate the applicant's willingness to make the changes to the signage. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
I just wanted to hear from my fellow commissioners about modifying the dimensions of the overall sign to come in compliance with the signage plan.
I'd support that.
We're talking specifically about the sign on the, the sign on the...
That sign.
This sign.
This sign.
Reporting, can you, for the record, what?
It's page, it's cut off, 117, I think, of the packet, Exhibit 3F. Shows a 12-foot wide at the top parapet, and then it shows a 20-foot height overall. I would like it to be within the 10-foot by 18.
Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, I'd support that as well. I think the consistency with the existing signage is important.
Thank you. Commissioner Behringer?
Yeah, I come from a background where bigger signs are better, but I would certainly defer to my fellow commissioners.
Okay. Commissioner Cooper?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
Move that the Planning Commission find the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approve site development permit PSD 809-16, use permit UP 72-16, parking exception PE 166-16, and sign permit S 118-16 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A as modified to limit the exterior sign within the signage guidelines of no higher than 18 feet by 10 feet wide in all instances, including overhangs and lighting, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper, for that motion. Commissioner Behringer?
I will second that motion.
Okay, we've got motion and a second. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Okay, well, that's unanimously approved, 6 votes to no one opposed. So thank you very much. And that then will take us to again, we had already moved item 4, the rent increase application, to the first item, which we then continued to June 19th, which takes us into our consideration item, which is appointment of one planning commissioner to the Library Advisory Committee. It had been my suggestion at the last meeting we just appoint the absent commissioner, but my fellow commissioners prevailed upon me to go a different route. So we're back on this item, and don't need to, I guess, is there anything that staff wants to add to the mix?
No, nothing further.
Okay.
Just looking for an appointment.
Well, gentlemen, what do you think? I'm not seeing a lot of lights blink up here, so.
I'll just, I'm not going to volunteer myself because I think that I have issues with the library, so I don't think I'd be highly impartial candidate, but I'm willing to report if that's what you guys need to.
I didn't follow what you just said.
Did you?
No.
Okay.
I would not want to volunteer.
So, got it.
Oh,
Okay.
I see.
So,
I see what you're saying.
so Commissioner Cooper's
Withdrawing
stated his
himself.
position. He
Right.
doesn't want to be nominated.
What are the
disinclined to serve if nominated?
What are the meeting obligations of this position?
The Library Advisory Committee meets once a month. It's on the second Wednesday of the month. So that's the meeting obligation. We also are doing quite a bit of public outreach, so we ask that commissioners come to community meetings, but that's certainly not obligated.
Right. My wife would kill me. I can't do it.
So shall we maybe try again when we have a
Oh my God, the
another appointment?
The new person.
The new
That should be a condition.
That may be a form of hazing that we engage in upon appointment. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is we'll go ahead and table this once again. It doesn't look like, unfortunately, at the moment, we're able to take action on this item. So we'll leave it at that. I did want to note that anyone aggrieved to the action of the Planning Commission today has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. Aside from that, then I'm going to move on to communications and ask if commissioners have any communications they care to share. Commissioner Clifford.
Oh, I wanted to report back that the City Council denied the appeal of the Planning Commission decision to deny the extension of approval of the Beach Boulevard 9 condo project.
I didn't follow that.
They didn't follow that. They backed us up.
Okay. Thanks for attending that meeting and for communicating our perspective on that project or that matter. Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, tonight is a question on the storage basin. What's happening with that? I thought we were going to get underway with that. I just said I don't know where it is in the...
I believe the contract has been awarded, and I don't know the construction schedule, but it is getting underway.
Okay. He seemed like he was pretty eminent when he did his presentation, so I was kind of curious why they haven't started.
Great, thank you. That then is going to, unless there's anybody else who wants to share communication, that'll take us then to staff communications.
I just wanted to share with the commission that the council tentatively is scheduled to discuss short-term rentals and provide some direction to staff next Monday. So if that's something you're interested in, you might want to tune in. That may change, but that's on the tentative schedule. And then I wanted to discuss the first meeting in July, which is July 3rd. It's kind of sandwiched in between the weekend and the July 4th holiday. So I was considering canceling that meeting, and I just wanted to get concurrence from the chair and the commission on that.
I will just speak for myself, I guess. I had planned to be out of town that July 4th.
I'll be out of town as well.
Is that yes?
Quite possibly me
Quite
also,
possibly.
yeah.
I think it might be difficult to muster a quorum, and it looks like. So I think our inclination would be to cancel it unless there's something real urgent, in which case people might have to adjust plans. But it sounds like cancellation would be the preference of the group.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think a motion to adjourn would be in order. Commissioner Gordon.
Move to adjourn.
Commissioner Clifford.
I'll second that motion.
Why don't we go ahead and vote? All right, unanimously in favor. Thank you.